10. Charleston Old City Jail, Charleston, South Carolina. In the heart of Charleston, South Carolina, stands a relic of a dark past, the Charleston Old City Jail. Built in 1802. For over 137 years, the Charleston Old City Jail housed the worst criminals, war prisoners, and even falsely accused innocents. From its earliest days, it was notorious for its harsh punishments and cruel executions. During the Civil War, Confederate soldiers and political prisoners filled its overcrowded cells, many succumbing to disease, starvation, or violent deaths. Among its most infamous inmates was Lavinia Fisher, the first female serial killer in the United States. Alongside her husband, John, she ran an inn outside Charleston, where unsuspecting travelers were drugged and murdered. Arrested and sentenced to death, Lavinia's final words before the noose tightened around her neck sent chills through the crowd: "If you have a message for the devil, give it to me now, for I am about to meet him." As time passed, the jail's grim reputation grew. Torture devices like the whipping post and the cat-o'-nine-tails left prisoners scarred, both physically and mentally. Executions were common, and mass graves were dug to bury the countless bodies. By 1939, the jail was shut down. But the echoes of the past refused to fade. Soon after its closure, whispers of unexplained noises, eerie footsteps, and ghostly apparitions began to circulate. Paranormal investigators, ghost hunters, and even skeptics stepped inside, only to leave with spine-chilling encounters. Visitors report seeing shadowy figures lurking in the hallways and hearing disembodied voices calling out their names. Some have felt an icy grip around their wrists, as if unseen hands were trying to drag them into the darkness. Others have captured strange orbs and mist-like figures in photographs, evidence that something, or someone, still lingers. The most terrifying encounters come from those who dare to step into Lavinia Fisher's old cell. Many claim to hear her laughter echoing in the night, or feel her unseen presence standing just inches away. Some even report being scratched or shoved by an invisible force. Paranormal teams have recorded EVP, electronic voice phenomena, of ghostly whispers, including the words, "Get out," and "Help me." Security guards have reported lights flickering, doors slamming shut on their own, and sudden drops in temperature. One visitor swore they saw the ghostly figure of a man in prisoner's rags staring at them from a cell window, only to find the cell completely empty. Another claimed they felt a tight noose around their neck the moment they stepped onto the old execution grounds. Tour guides leading ghost walks through the jail often report their equipment malfunctioning, as if something unseen is interfering. Some have even quit their jobs after experiencing encounters too terrifying to explain. The Charleston Old City Jail is not just a historical site, it's a place where the past refuses to die. The spirits of murderers, thieves, tortured souls, and wrongfully convicted victims still roam the decaying halls, trapped in a prison of their own making. 9. Yuma Territorial Prison, Yuma, Arizona. The Yuma Territorial Prison was a hell on earth. Surrounded by the unforgiving Sonoran Desert and the raging Colorado River, escape was nearly impossible. If the brutal heat didn't kill you, the relentless prison guards, or the other inmates, would. For 33 years, the prison housed over 3,000 convicts, including notorious criminals, thieves, and murderers. Conditions were harsh. Overcrowded cells, extreme heat, and the constant threat of disease made life unbearable. The worst of all punishments. The dark cell, a pitch-black, underground chamber where prisoners were thrown into solitary confinement, often for weeks, with nothing but rats and their own screams for company. Many never made it out. Some prisoners were murdered by fellow inmates. Others succumbed to disease, suicide, or madness. 111 men died within these walls, and their restless souls are said to linger even today. By 1909, the prison was shut down. Its last inmates transferred elsewhere. The iron gates were locked, and the prison was abandoned. But the dead? They never left. Soon after its closure, reports of strange occurrences began to spread. Locals whispered of eerie shadow figures, unexplained footsteps, and ghostly whispers drifting through the empty corridors. Tourists exploring the ruins reported feeling unseen hands push or grab them. Some heard the sound of rattling chains and disembodied voices calling their names. The old guard tower, once a symbol of control, became a hotspot for paranormal activity, where some claimed to see the ghost of a long-dead guard still keeping watch. But the most terrifying place of all: the dark cell. The dark cell is where the most violent and disturbed energy remains trapped. Many visitors who step inside report feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. Some have collapsed, unable to breathe, as if something unseen is pressing down on their chest. Others describe feeling cold fingers run down their spine, even in the scorching Arizona heat. In one chilling case, a paranormal investigator spent the night locked inside. Armed with only a flashlight and a camera, he recorded strange whispering voices and the sound of footsteps circling him, though he was completely alone. When he finally escaped, he swore he saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring at him from the darkness. But perhaps the most famous story is that of a young woman who visited the prison. As she stepped into the dark cell, she suddenly screamed and ran out, claiming that something invisible had grabbed her wrist. When she looked down, she saw deep red scratch marks, marks that had not been there moments before. The hauntings are not confined to just one room. The entire prison is filled with unexplainable activity. Ghostly figures. Visitors often report seeing shadowy apparitions of former inmates, pacing back and forth in their cells. Unexplained sounds, footsteps echo through the hallways, chains rattle, and prisoners' voices can be heard murmuring, yet the cells remain empty. Sudden cold spots. Even in the Arizona heat, visitors describe feeling icy chills as they walk through certain areas, especially near the former hanging gallows. Phantom touches. People have reported feeling a ghostly hand grab their shoulder or push them forward, as if an unseen prisoner is trying to escape. The Yuma Territorial Prison is more than just a historical site. It is a place where suffering, despair, and death left a permanent mark on reality. 8. Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary, Petros, Tennessee. Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary was established in 1896, originally designed as a labor camp for the most hardened criminals. With no fences or walls, the surrounding wilderness itself was the prison. Anyone who tried to escape faced miles of rugged terrain, deadly wildlife, and near-certain death. But soon, the prison became a fortress, with thick stone walls and steel gates trapping inmates inside. Over the decades, it earned a reputation as Tennessee's Alcatraz, a place of brutal punishment, backbreaking labor, and violent death. Inside, the conditions were inhumane. The cells were overcrowded, the food barely edible, and the punishment severe. Inmates fought for survival every day, some murdered in their cells, others dying from disease and neglect. Executions were carried out on site, and those who died were buried in unmarked graves, their names forgotten, but their spirits never silenced. By 2009, the prison finally shut down. But even after the last inmate was removed, the darkness remained. The spirits of the tormented, the killers, and the innocent alike refused to leave. As soon as the prison closed, stories of paranormal activity began to emerge. Guards, visitors, and paranormal investigators have reported eerie sounds, ghostly figures, and unexplainable encounters. In the old cell blocks, shadows move where no one should be. The sound of metal doors slamming shut echoes through the empty corridors. Cold spots appear suddenly, even in the heat of summer. And in the dead of night, voices whisper through the air, voices of those long since dead. The most haunted area? The Hole, Brushy Mountain's version of solitary confinement. The Hole was where the worst of the worst were sent, dangerous inmates, rule breakers, and those the guards wanted to forget. It was pitch black, cold, and silent. Some prisoners spent weeks, even months, inside, slowly losing their sanity. Today, those who step into the Hole report a crushing sense of dread, as if unseen eyes are watching them. Paranormal investigators have captured EVP recordings of screams and whispers, though no living soul was inside. One visitor claimed to feel invisible hands grab their throat, making it impossible to breathe. Another ran out in terror after hearing his own name whispered in his ear. The hauntings aren't confined to just one area. All of Brushy Mountain is alive with the dead. Shadow figures, dark apparitions lurk in doorways and vanish when approached. Disembodied voices, whispers, cries for help, and even angry shouts echo through the cell blocks. Phantom footsteps, heavy boots stomp through the halls, though the prison remains empty. Unexplained attacks, visitors report being pushed, scratched, or even slapped by unseen forces. One of the most chilling encounters happened to a former tour guide who suddenly felt an icy grip on his shoulder. When he turned around, no one was there, but a deep, bloody scratch appeared on his arm moments later. Perhaps the most infamous spirit tied to Brushy Mountain is James Earl Ray, the assassin of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was imprisoned here after his conviction and famously attempted to escape in 1977, only to be caught in the mountains surrounding the prison. To this day, visitors claim to see a shadowy figure standing near Ray's old cell. Some even report hearing the sound of someone running, gasping for breath, as if reliving an escape attempt that would never succeed. Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary is no longer a prison for the living, but for the dead, it is an eternal sentence. 7. Wyoming Frontier Prison, Rawlins, Wyoming. Built in 1901, the Wyoming Frontier Prison was designed to hold the most dangerous outlaws of the West. It took 13 years to complete, and by the time it opened its gates in 1911, it was already infamous. For nearly 80 years, it housed thousands of criminals, murderers, thieves, and the hopelessly insane. The conditions inside were brutal. There was no running water, no proper heating, and no mercy. The winter months turned the cells into frozen tombs, and in the summer, the heat was unbearable. Disease, violence, and insanity were a part of everyday life. The prison was notorious for its executions. Between 1912 and 1933, it carried out 14 hangings and 5 gas chamber deaths, but many believe that not all of these condemned souls moved on. Some say they still walk the corridors, searching for justice or revenge. By 1981, the prison finally closed. The inmates were transferred, and the iron doors were locked for good. But soon, visitors realized that some prisoners had never left. From the moment the prison shut down, paranormal activity surged. Tour guides, visitors, and ghost hunters all reported the same eerie sensations: unseen eyes watching them, cold spots that sent chills down their spines, and whispers echoing through the empty cells. Some even claimed to have seen full-bodied apparitions, prisoners still locked in their cells, staring out with hollow, dead eyes. But the most terrifying encounters happen in the death chamber. The execution room is the most haunted place in the prison. The gallows where 14 men were hanged still stand, a grim reminder of justice served, or denied. Those who step too close report feeling a sudden pressure on their neck, as if a phantom noose were tightening around their throat. And then there's the gas chamber. Built in the 1930s, it was used to execute 5 men, forcing them to take their final breath in a cloud of poison. Paranormal investigators have captured disembodied voices, shadow figures, and sudden temperature drops in this very room. Some have even claimed to hear gasping sounds, like someone struggling for air. One of the most disturbing stories comes from a visitor who sat in the gas chamber's metal chair. Within moments, she felt her chest tighten and a voice whisper in her ear, "Get out." She left in terror, but the feeling of suffocation stayed with her for hours. The entire prison is filled with strange, unexplainable occurrences. The Shadow Man, a tall, dark figure, is often seen standing at the end of hallways, watching visitors before vanishing into thin air. The Whistling Prisoner, many have reported hearing an eerie whistling tune, though no one can ever find its source. The Cursed Cell Block C, is known for its aggressive spirits. Visitors report feeling pushed, scratched, or grabbed by invisible hands. The laughing killer, a sinister cackling laugh, is sometimes heard coming from the solitary confinement cells, where the most violent inmates were kept. One of the most terrifying encounters happened to a paranormal investigator who spent the night in a solitary cell. Armed with cameras and recorders, he expected to capture whispers, maybe even a few shadow figures. But what he didn't expect was a deep growling voice calling his name. He ran out, only to realize his audio recorder had captured the words, "You can't leave." Even though the Wyoming Frontier Prison has been closed for over 40 years, it remains alive with the dead. 6. Missouri State Penitentiary, Jefferson City, Missouri. For over 160 years, the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City was known as the bloodiest 47 acres in America. Thousands of prisoners passed through its iron gates, some of the most violent criminals in history. Many of them never made it out. Established in 1836, the Missouri State Penitentiary was one of the oldest and most infamous prisons in the United States. For over a century, it housed serial killers, gangsters, and outlaws, including the notorious James Earl Ray, who later escaped and assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But life inside these walls was worse than death. The conditions were inhumane, cells were overcrowded, disease ran rampant, and violence was a daily occurrence. Executions took place on site, with prisoners meeting their fate in the gas chamber. The prison became one of the most violent in America, with countless murders, suicides, and riots turning it into a literal hell on earth. One of the deadliest riots occurred in 1954, when inmates took control of the prison, killing guards, setting fires, and leaving the facility in ruins. By 2004, the Missouri State Penitentiary finally shut down. But even after the last inmate left, the souls of the damned remained. Soon after its closure, reports of ghostly activity began pouring in. Visitors, guards, and paranormal investigators experienced shadows moving in the cells, disembodied voices calling out, and an overwhelming sense of dread in certain areas. The prison is now known as one of the most haunted locations in the country, with its darkest secrets still alive in the form of restless spirits. The death row cells and gas chamber are said to be the most active. Some claim to feel a phantom noose tighten around their neck or a sudden sense of breathlessness, as if the spirits of the executed are reliving their final moments. The gas chamber at Missouri State Penitentiary is one of the most haunted places in the prison. It was here that 40 men and women were executed, their last breaths taken in a cloud of cyanide gas. Visitors have reported feeling an intense pressure on their chest, as if they were suffocating. Hearing faint whispers, pleading for mercy. Seeing shadowy figures sitting in the chairs, waiting for their fate. One paranormal investigator who sat in the gas chamber felt an unseen force push them back in a voice whisper, "Not your time." The hauntings aren't confined to just the gas chamber. All throughout the prison, strange occurrences happen daily. The hallway of shadows, dark figures are seen darting through the corridors, only to disappear into thin air. The whispers in the cells, inmates long gone still seem to have something to say. Visitors report hearing muffled voices, crying, and even violent screams. The suicidal cell, one particular cell, where an inmate hung himself, remains ice cold, no matter the temperature outside. Those who enter often feel a sudden wave of sadness or dread, as if experiencing his final moments. The riot spirits. In the areas where riots took place, visitors claim to hear footsteps running, distant shouts, and even gunshots, though the halls remain empty. Even though Missouri State Penitentiary has been closed for decades, something sinister still lingers. 5. Old Idaho State Penitentiary, Boise, Idaho. Built in 1870, the old Idaho State Penitentiary was designed as a fortress to hold the most violent and ruthless criminals of the time. At first, it was just a small territorial prison, but as Idaho grew, so did the prison's population. Over the years, the prison expanded to over 20 buildings, each one filled with misery. The cells were cramped, filthy, and brutally cold in the winter. Inmates suffered from disease, malnutrition, and the cruelty of both guards and fellow prisoners. But it wasn't just the harsh conditions that made the prison infamous, it was the executions and violent deaths. The gallows claimed the lives of 10 men, their final breaths stolen beneath the noose. The solitary confinement cell, known as Siberia, broke men's minds, leaving them whispering to unseen figures. Riots erupted, the most infamous in 1973, when prisoners set fire to the prison in protest of their inhumane treatment. By 1973, the old Idaho State Penitentiary was shut down, its walls forever stained with suffering. But something remained. Something dark. The moment the prison was abandoned, the paranormal activity began. Visitors reported cold spots, strange noises, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched. Some even saw ghostly figures peering out from the cell windows, their empty eyes filled with sorrow or rage. The prison quickly became one of Idaho's most haunted locations, with stories of ghostly inmates and restless spirits becoming more frequent every year. Cell House 5, the most feared part of the prison, was death row. The worst of the worst awaited their execution in these cells. People have reported seeing a dark shadow figure lurking in the hallways, watching them. Some say it's the spirit of Raymond Allen Snowden, Idaho's very own Jack the Ripper. Snowden was hanged in 1957, but the execution was botched. Instead of dying instantly, he strangled at the end of the rope for over 15 minutes, his body twitching as he slowly suffocated. Now, his angry spirit roams death row, his presence marked by sudden chills, whispers, and the feeling of invisible hands gripping your throat. Not all prisoners were men. Lydia, one of the few female inmates, was sentenced for poisoning her husband. She died inside the prison, but some say she never left. In the old rose garden, visitors claimed to see a woman in a long dress staring at them. Some say she looks sad. Others say she whispers their names before vanishing into the mist. Siberia, the most feared section of the prison, was a place of madness. Inmates were locked in total darkness for days, weeks, even months. Many lost their minds. Some never came out alive. Today, people report hearing footsteps pacing back and forth, as if someone is still trapped inside, waiting. Some visitors have even entered the cells only to hear heavy breathing right behind them, though no one is there. Even though the old Idaho State Penitentiary has been closed for decades, it still holds its prisoners. 4. West Virginia Penitentiary, Moundsville, West Virginia. Built in 1866, the West Virginia Penitentiary was designed as a fortress to contain the worst criminals in the state. It was a massive Gothic-style structure, its towering stone walls meant to strike fear into anyone who entered. From the very beginning, the prison was overcrowded and brutal. The conditions were inhumane, cells meant for one inmate held 3, disease spread rapidly, and violence became a way of life. This prison wasn't just a place of confinement. It was a place of death. Over 100 prisoners were executed either by hanging or the electric chair, known as Old Sparky. Many more were murdered by fellow inmates, their bodies left to rot in blood-stained cells. Riots and escape attempts turned the prison into a battleground, with guards and inmates slaughtered in the chaos. By 1995, after more than a century of brutality, the prison was finally shut down. But while the living moved on, the dead remained. From the moment the prison closed, reports of paranormal activity flooded in. Visitors, guards, and ghost hunters all experienced strange noises, chilling whispers, and ghostly apparitions. The air inside the prison feels heavy, as if the walls themselves are alive with the energy of the past. Some who enter never forget what they see, or what follows them home. One of the most feared spirits in the prison is the Shadow Man, a tall, faceless figure who lurks in the hallways and cells. Visitors describe seeing a massive black figure moving through the darkness, sometimes standing just inches away. Those who see it report an overwhelming sense of dread, sudden nausea, and even scratches appearing on their skin. Some believe this entity is a demonic force, feeding on the pain that still lingers in the prison. Deep inside the prison lies the Sugar Shack, an underground recreation room where inmates carried out horrific acts of violence. Beatings, stabbings, and even murders took place in the shadows. Some inmates went in but never came out, their bodies hidden within the prison's walls. Today, the Sugar Shack is one of the most haunted places in the prison. Visitors report hearing faint whispers, the sound of shuffling feet, and even disembodied screams. Some have even seen ghostly figures darting between the shadows, prisoners still trapped in their own personal hell. The North Wagon Gate was the site of the prison's hangings, where over 90 men were executed. Some of those executions went horribly wrong, with prisoners being decapitated instead of hanged properly. Now, ghostly figures are often seen near the gate, some with the rope still around their necks. Others report feeling tightness in their throat, as if they too are being hanged by an unseen force. One of the most infamous hauntings in the prison is tied to cell 17. In the 1930s, an inmate was brutally stabbed to death by fellow prisoners, his blood soaking the stone walls. Today, those who step into cell 17 feel an intense cold, even in the middle of summer. Some say they hear gasping, as if someone is taking their last breath, while others have seen bloody handprints appear and disappear on the walls. West Virginia Penitentiary may be empty, but it will never be silent. 3. Ohio State Reformatory, Mansfield, Ohio. The Ohio State Reformatory was built in 1886 with a noble purpose, to reform young offenders rather than punish them. Its Gothic, castle-like design was meant to inspire inmates to change their ways. At first, it worked. The prison gave inmates a chance to learn trades and rebuild their lives. But as the years passed, the population exploded, and the prison turned into something far worse than its creators had imagined. By the mid-1900s, the reformatory was severely overcrowded, forcing men into tiny, inhumane cells. The once promising institution became a place of torment, violence, and death. Torture was common, inmates were beaten, starved, and locked in solitary confinement for days or weeks at a time. Riots erupted, as desperate prisoners fought against the brutal conditions. Some inmates were murdered in their cells, their bloodstains still said to be visible on the floors. The most infamous room in the prison was the Hole, a pitch-black solitary confinement chamber where inmates were locked away for weeks, left to scream in the darkness. Some never came out alive. By 1990, the prison was finally shut down, its walls forever stained by suffering. But even though the doors closed, not everyone inside was willing to leave. From the moment the prison closed, strange things started happening. Visitors and ghost hunters reported whispers, footsteps, and cold spots. Dark figures were seen darting through the hallways. Some even claimed to have been touched, pushed, or scratched by unseen hands. But the most terrifying encounters happen in the very places where death and suffering were at their worst. One of the most infamous spirits in the prison is Helen Glatka, the wife of the warden. In 1950, she died from a gunshot wound inside their quarters. Some say it was an accident, others suspect foul play. To this day, visitors report a woman's voice, the scent of perfume, and a ghostly presence moving through the warden's living space. Some have even seen her shadow standing in the doorway, watching. The Hole was the prison's darkest secret, a place where inmates were thrown into absolute darkness, left alone with their fears. Many prisoners lost their minds inside those walls. Some never left. Today, visitors who dare to enter the Hole feel an unbearable weight, as if something is pressing down on them. Some say they hear breathing in the darkness. Others report a sudden feeling of panic, as if something is crawling toward them. Cell 13 is said to be haunted by an inmate who was murdered by his cellmate. His body was found mangled and bloodied, his face twisted in terror. Now, his spirit lingers. Visitors who step inside Cell 13 report hearing low whispers, feeling sudden chills, and even being grabbed by invisible hands. The prison chapel should have been a place of peace, but it has become one of the most haunted locations in the entire prison. A tall, shadowy figure has been seen lurking in the corners, watching visitors with glowing eyes. Some say he is the spirit of a former guard who tormented prisoners, a soul so full of cruelty that even death couldn't stop him. People who enter the chapel report hearing growls, seeing crosses move on their own, and feeling a powerful force pushing them away. The Ohio State Reformatory has stood for over 130 years, and its walls have absorbed the pain, suffering, and terror of thousands of souls. Now, those spirits remain trapped. They whisper in the cells. They lurk in the hallways. They reach out from the darkness, waiting for someone, maybe even you, to hear their stories. So if you ever visit, remember this: you may walk in alone, but you may not walk out the same. 2. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, San Francisco, California. We've previously covered Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary in detail in another video. If you haven't seen it yet, link is in the description. 1. Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In the heart of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, stands one of the most chilling and infamous prisons in American history, Eastern State Penitentiary. Once a revolutionary institution, it became a place of horror, madness, and suffering. Today, its crumbling cell blocks remain haunted by the tortured souls of those who never left. When Eastern State Penitentiary opened in 1829, it was unlike any prison the world had ever seen. Designed to reform, not just punish, it introduced a radical idea: solitary confinement. Prisoners were kept in small, windowless cells, completely alone. They had no human contact, not even with guards. When they left their cells, they were hooded to prevent them from seeing or being seen. The system was meant to force reflection and repentance, but instead, it drove inmates insane. The prison soon became a living nightmare, filled with screams, whispers, and broken minds. Many prisoners took their own lives, while others died in despair, their spirits forever trapped within the cold stone walls. By the early 1900s, Eastern State abandoned solitary confinement and became a regular prison, but the damage had already been done. The suffering left a scar on the building, one that would never heal. In 1971, the prison finally shut down, but as the last guard locked the doors, something inside remained. Almost immediately after Eastern State was abandoned, strange occurrences were reported. People heard footsteps echoing in empty halls, saw shadowy figures darting between cells, and felt unseen hands brushing against them. The prison's ghostly reputation grew, attracting visitors, paranormal investigators, and skeptics alike. But the deeper they ventured into the darkness, the more horrifying the encounters became. One of the most haunted areas is Cell Block 12, where inmates once screamed in agony behind locked doors. Visitors report hearing whispers, maniacal laughter, and even blood-curdling screams echoing down the corridor, despite the fact that no one is there. Some have even captured EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, of voices saying, "Help me, leave now," and "I'm still here." Cell Block 6 is home to something far more sinister: shadow figures. Visitors report seeing dark, human-shaped forms moving along the walls, vanishing the moment they turn to look. Some describe the figures as watching them from the darkness, as if waiting for the right moment to strike. Many who step into Cell Block 6 feel an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something is lurking just behind them. In Cell Block 4, a spirit with glowing, empty eye sockets has been seen lurking in doorways. A former guard reported seeing a tall, dark figure standing motionless at the end of the hall. As he stepped closer, it vanished into thin air. Others claim they felt an invisible force pushing them, or even grabbing their arms, as if trying to drag them back into the darkness. One of Eastern State's most infamous inmates was Al Capone, the notorious gangster. Unlike other prisoners, Capone had a luxurious cell, but even he wasn't safe from the prison's horrors. Capone claimed to be tormented by the ghost of James Clark, a man he had killed in the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Guards often heard Capone screaming in his cell, begging someone, or something, to get away from me. Even today, visitors standing outside Capone's old cell report hearing whispers and frantic cries, as if his tortured soul is still trapped there.